le patriotisme régional et l'action conformément à la vision de son président de la République, son Excellence M. Faure Eswazimna Singbe. Son Excellence professeur Robert Doucet, ministre des Affaires étrangères, de l'intégration régionale et des Togolais de l'extérieur, M. Abdi Saïd Moussa Ali, ancien ministre des Affaires étrangères de la coopération internationale de la Somalie, M. le secrétaire général du ministère des Affaires étrangères, Mesdames et Messieurs les membres du corps diplomatique et consulaire, Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants des organisations internationales, distingués professeurs d'université et avocats à la Cour, Mesdames et Messieurs les directeurs et chefs de service du ministère des Affaires étrangères, distingués invités, Mesdames et Messieurs, soyez les bienvenus à cette rentrée diplomatique 2022-2023, deuxième du genre, qui s'inscrit désormais dans la tradition républicaine, offrant l'occasion d'augurer des grandes orientations du Togo sur le plan diplomatique, dont le thème de l'année est « Défis sécuritaires et stratégies de stabilisation des régions du continent confrontées au terrorisme et à l'extrémisme violent ». Cet événement connaîtra une allocution introductive de M. le ministre des Affaires étrangères. Son temps fort sera la conférence sur le thème susmentionné qui sera accordée par l'ancien ministre des Affaires étrangères de la Somalie, puis s'en suivra le débat. Une photo de famille se fera à la fin, puis un cocktail que M. le ministre se fera le plaisir de partager avec vous. Ceci dit, pour une fois, nous voudrions être autorisés à introduire tout singulièrement la personnalité qui nous fait l'honneur de l'allocution introductive. Et pour cause, il y a à peine quelques semaines, lors du colloque diplomatique dernier, nous osions célébrer les actions de l'homme en faveur de la paix et du développement. Loin d'être un mage, nous prédisions également des distinctions à venir. Eh bien, nous nous en voudrions de ne pas saisir cette première heureuse occasion pour exalter ici le prix international des droits de l'homme attribué le 14 août dernier par la Commission internationale des droits de l'homme au chef de la diplomatie togolaise pour ses actions diplomatiques au service de l'idéal d'un monde plus juste, équitable, sûr, durable, bref, simplement plus humain. Alors, si vous ne trouvez aucun inconvénient à cela, je voudrais vous proposer d'accueillir comme il se doit, en pareille circonstance, son Excellence professeur Robert Doucet pour son allocution introductive.
Bonjour à tout le monde. Le maître de cérémonie est un politicien. Il voulait me présenter, j'ai dit, mais il n'a pas à me présenter. Nous nous connaissons assez, donc on va à l'essentiel. Monsieur le secrétaire général du ministère des Affaires étrangères, Mesdames et Messieurs les directeurs, Monsieur l'inspecteur des missions diplomatiques, chers collaborateurs, ladies and gentlemen, ambassador and head of diplomatic and consular missions, ladies and gentlemen, representative of international organization accredited in Togo, dear friend, dear brother, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Somalia, my brother Abi Said, dear guests, and dear guests from the academic world, distinguished guests, cher ami Antonio Le Greco et Madame, je vais dire ça en italien, Presidente of Distretto Internazionale. Je n'ai pas perdu mon italien. Merci. Ladies and gentlemen, seriously, the start of the diplomatic year in an annual opportunity for the government of Togo to recall the main outlines of Togo's external public action, which, as you know, plays its part and contributed to the extent of its capacity to the service of efforts aiming at improving the condition of our work or building it better for the prosperity of each of our states and the whole of the international society confronted with, as you know yourself, unprecedented mutation and challenges as worrying as pressing. First, with the urgent need, it's necessary to act in Togolese diplomacy, following, of course, the vision and the orientation of the President of the Republic, His Excellency for Isozimnanya Simbe. It is a diplomacy of action. More than managing relations between states, diplomacy is taking in hand and managing the major issue of our sub-region, interregional spaces, continents, and international society. The subject of common concern are not numerous today that diplomacy cannot be satisfied with the minimum service. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, the Togolese diplomacy, I can say, want to be, or maybe the Togolese diplomacy is a pragmatic diplomacy of neutrality and non-alignment to better serve the causes of peace, collective security, regional and African integration, and human development. The posture of diplomatic equidistance allows us to talk to everyone in the management of international and regional affairs. In a word, no longer has a center of gravity, but where the relationships of common dependence and interdependence condemn us to work together. It's very important for everyone to know our position right now is a neutrality position. During the diplomatic year that starts today, our country will continue at a multilateral level to work with other African states and the African Union to strengthen Africa's capacity to assert itself and assume its position on the international scene with full responsibility. Our continent needs to speak with one voice and for itself on the international scene. In addition to these aspects, we will continue and strengthen during the year the work of diversification of our partnership and substantially the exploration of new horizons and new economic opportunities. The world itself has diversified before our eyes, and we have no choice but to adapt to the reality of the world, to explore all the possibilities and opportunities it offers. The issue of the African diaspora and Afro-descendants, precisely that of the involvement in the development process on continental scale, remain one of the lines of our foreign policy. Togo, as you know, will continue to work with other states and African Union to implement the agenda of the decade of African roots and African diaspora launched in 2021. Peace and stability, which remain priority issues to the Togolese diplomacy, will mobilize us even more toward the new diplomatic year through collective effort to fight terrorism and through good offices and mediation initiatives. Our state and our region need peace. Our region needs stability in the current context of expansion of destabilization action by armed terrorist group. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, the focus on security and peace last year, as well as this year in the context of the start of the diplomatic year, is due to the fact that our continent is at a crossroad, in terms of security, whether in the Sahel, the Lac Chad basin, West Africa, our region, the Gulf of Guinea region, and of course, because you have our friend here, the Horn of African region. Despite the efforts, initiative and strategy, both domestic and foreign, the dangerous process of dissemination of evil continues, and this perilous process cannot leave anyone indifferent. The destabilization of armed terrorist group is clearly an attempt to question momentum of sustainable pacification of our continent, and Africa must resist this movement of destruction of our achievement in terms of stability. This afternoon, conference with our friend, which is, I think, in fact, an opportunity for debate. For debate will allow us, I'm convinced, to have a clear exchange on the security challenges and stabilization strategy for the region of Africa confronted with terrorism and violent extremism. Finally, I would like him to take the floor. It's not my conference, it's his conference. Dear Said, I would like to thank my friend, my brother Said, who accepted to be the main speaker of this conference, and all the guests whose presence bring more brightness and human warmth to this meeting of the start of a diplomatic year 2020, 22 and 23. Thank you so much. MC, you have the floor.
Nous remercions Monsieur le ministre des Affaires étrangères qui nous aurait rappelé une fois encore la position, les défis sécuritaires et l'engagement du Togo en faveur de la paix dans la sous-région et en Afrique. Et ces défis seront mieux cernés tout à l'heure. À travers la conférence débat que l'ancien ministre des Affaires étrangères de la Somalie nous fait l'honneur de nous accorder, bien entendu, sous la modération de l'ambassadeur de la République arabe d'Égypte, son Excellence Adel Ahmed Al-Samawi, que je vous invite à écouter.
Je voudrais remercier Son Excellence, Monsieur le ministre, professeur Ducé, de m'avoir donné l'honneur d'être ou de faire le rôle de modérateur aujourd'hui. C'est la première fois que je fais ce rôle, mais il y a toujours une première fois. I guess I will switch in English. I'm really thankful and honored that His Excellency Minister Professor Ducé gave me the honor to be the moderator today. And as I said in French, it's the first time, the first experience to be a moderator, but there is always the first time. His Excellency, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Somalia, Abdi Said Musa Ali, was the 30th Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. His Excellency also served as the Chief Staff to the President of the Federal Republic of Somalia. His Excellency was the longest-serving National Security Advisor to the President from December 2017 till September 2021. His Excellency was responsible for the strategic oversight and daily management of security policy in Somalia, covering military, police, and intelligence institutions. Notably, he has led the development, endorsement, and early implementation of the transition plan on behalf of the federal government of Somalia, as well as shaping the new African Union transition mission to Somalia. The new Somali transition plan sets a new direction for security delivery and development in Somalia, and has received the strong support of national and international security stakeholders, and commendation for Abdi Said's leadership for the policy. Prior to joining the FGS, His Excellency served as Regional Political Advisor to the European Union Special Representative for the Horn of Africa, with a focus on political instability, radicalization, and violent extremism in the region. His Excellency previous roles include Somalia, country representative for Nordic International Support Foundation, and senior consultant on border management, radicalization process, and maritime security for IGAD. He also held research and analysis roles for IGAD, Kenya's Foreign Service Institute, King's College London's Futures Project, and the Center on Global Counterterrorism Cooperation in Addis Ababa, as well as advisory roles for the Somali Transitional Federal Government and Italian Development Cooperation. His Excellency was educated in the Netherlands, UK, and US, and holds a number of graduate and postgraduate qualifications. I invite His Excellency to give his speech.
Bonjour, that's my French. Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction by Ambassador Ahmed Samawi. Thank you very much. I also want to thank His Excellency Professor Robert Dussi, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Regional Integration, and Togolese abroad, esteemed diplomats, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. I came from the Gulf of Aden to the Gulf of Guinea, where I am today. And I will tell you later about the reason why from one Gulf to another. It's a privilege and honor to be invited as a guest speaker in this historic city of Lome. I used to hear when I was young the city, and I was always looking forward to seeing the historic Lome Convention where it happened. And I thank our brother for inviting me here. I commend Professor Robert Dussi's initiating this annual meeting. It provides an opportunity for various diplomatic missions and also Togolese diplomats to take a stock of ever-changing and especially now that the world, a lot is happening, not only in Africa but also in Europe, with unprecedented challenges, not only security but also other issues. I'm not going to lecture you today, but share with you, with my experience and passion and interest in this topic that we discussed, was mentioned earlier. And I thank again also the Professor of Wisdom and Candor, as my other ministers have said. I have been recently, early this year, we campaigned to be part of African Union Peace and Security, to be a member. And the reason why we campaigned at the time was because we believed we had unique experience in terms of the civil strife that Somalia went through, but also the experience we had with Al-Shabaab for more than a decade, and benefiting from instruments, multilateral and bilateral, in terms of security from our African brothers, but also from our international partners. So there is no other African country that has faced the multifaceted security challenges like we have seen in Somalia in the past 30 years. So it is that unique position that I come to you today to share our experiences and lessons learned, so that collectively we envisage Africa that is prosperous, peaceful, and stronger. I have been following also the recent, in the last few years, the terrorist activities that have been happening in this part of the world. In my previous hat as National Security Advisor, where I had interacted directly with different intelligence services in the continent. And we have also shared our partners in the other African countries, especially in the Horn and the South. The experience we had with Al-Shabaab and Daesh, and the way they have interacted and supported the other different terrorists, you can call them extremist groups. The names continue to change in different contexts, but the core ideas and the core modus operandi is the same. If you see Togo from outside, you will see that the surrounding countries, my experience is limited here, but from where we are, you can see Togo is in strategic vulnerability, surrounded by actors that have similar approaches in the Horn. And when you read the news, you will hear these African states, especially in this part of the world. There was a recent article in the BBC saying why African states are buying Turkish Bayraktar TB2, stuff like that, this news. The trends we see from east to southwest in the last few years of Al-Shabaab and Daesh, ISIS, is not limited to the Horn and Somalia. So through our diplomatic and other discussions and partnership, we had shared also operational intelligence information with our partners in other countries, especially those in the east and the south, on the expansion of these groups and how they cooperate between and among themselves. The threat, of course, is in transnational nature, and we have also exchanged ideas with African Union Peace and Security Council and the Commission, because at their vantage point, this is where they can address the issues that are cross-cutting but are across regions in Africa, from east to south to east to west, so that our leaders have better informed decision-making process, where they can see the movement of money, technology, and men, especially foreign fighters, moving across continent. Recently, I think our president, the new president of Somalia, has mentioned that revenue generated by Al-Shabaab is shared with other groups. And this is, I think I agree with him, but it's not only finance that has been shared, they have also shared expertise, but also the movement of foreign affairs, foreign fighters from Somalia, Kenya, and other countries in the neighboring to move within the transnational criminal networks and instigate an existing local grievances in these countries. Usually what we have is, and it's like any other country, you will have, of course, local grievances that are related to maybe service delivery or lack of services, lack of governance, lack of medicine schools, political representation, inclusion. These grievances are understandable and they exist. But it becomes problematic when the issue is transnational. It's projected as an international jihadi. It cannot address it alone because the issue is now different. The technology used, the IEDs, the way they operate, the way they use weapons and move money and men is different and is beyond the capacity of most of the African countries. And sometimes money coast from Somalia all the way to Beira is Swahili coast in Mozambique, up to DRC. They might speak Kiswahili, but they might also speak Arabic. And then the language sometimes, especially if it's Arabic, is very difficult for many African countries. When the groups are communicating, agencies to track this or to understand. I told you earlier that I came from Gulf of Aden in Somalia. In Puntland specifically, that was where I was just a few days ago. And the movement of Daesh from that area, and of course across Yemen to Puntland, and then move around through the eastern African countries all the way to Mozambique. It happened a few years back. And I'm not expert in the groups here, like Jama' al-Nusrat, but most of the Salafi jihadi extremist groups operate in the same manner, and their idea and objective is to create conditions that are conducive for fear and terror. And the way they will do is they will of course target the link between the state and the community. And usually in our African countries is the community leaders, the youth leaders, the specific government representation at the periphery. Once those are removed, then you will have a fear instilled in that community, and then the extortion follows, and people will hush. They will not share intelligence with the government. The moment these things happen is when the grievance of the local community is translated into jihadi global grievances. And I think it becomes more complex once that spark happens. I think in Togo it's not there, but in most of your neighboring countries it's heading to that way. And then you have highly complex groupings like G5 that have their own issues, and when the international support related to a multilateral organization or the regional organization has issues, then it becomes very difficult also to get the necessary support to prevent these things. And in my opinion, there are several, I was asked to at least not provide solution, but mention some steps that are possible and will help in addressing this. So I think the first is to understand the group, the specific group. Here, for example, it's this Salafi Jihadi Jamal Nusrat al-Islam or Nusra al-Islam. Of course, their language, the specific language they use, the modus operandi, the way they frame and articulate the jihadi version of their fight. And we must know also the structure and the operation and the ideology we know, I think. But then the root cause, how do you disentangle the root cause, the contributing and aggravating factors? Because sometimes what happens is countries are shocked, states are shocked, and then something happens, and then they react, the military and intelligence services, they react in a way that, and we have done these mistakes many years back, they react in a way that mobilizes the whole community against the state, because they collectively punish a specific community that is expected to be sympathizers for this group. And this is why we need to understand not only the root cause, but contributing and aggravating factors. And then also, there are ways of disentangling the jihadi elements from the communities. And we must learn and train our soldiers and our security services because it's not only military means to confront this, especially when you want to dismantle the operational capacity of these groups. It has to be a way of making sure that the jihadi elements or foreign fighters and their capacities, the technology is disconnected from the community. And also we must disrupt the finance, in our region we call amniyat, these well-trained young guys that have multiple experts in different weapons, plus assembling IEDs from household stuff. And then what follows this transnational, I mentioned earlier, groups is the foreign fighters, those who come from different places, but tap into the local community. They find a moral boost and also bring ideas and jihadi ambition, and it is the responsibility of the state to make unattractive for these foreign fighters in their respective countries. So if it's drones, fine. If it's making narrative messages, counter-narrative messages, fine. If it's coordination and making sure that your intelligence and security forces are not killing a whole community, then also it's very important. But the key is to have partnership with all the transit nations that these foreign fighters are coming through, because that is missing usually, especially in our African continent. There are some lessons, best practices, and also not on how not to do things. And I mentioned a couple. And I think not only diplomats but also security experts should benefit from these lessons learned. And then I think the other point I want to raise is taking ownership of not only our strategic priorities, but the direction of your country, I think is very important, because there are vested interests and sometimes competing interests from partners, different partners, resources that are thrown at you, and you must identify how best to align the external support to your national interests in a way that serves and secures your country and borders from terrorism. And I think with these experiences and making sure that there's some coordination, not only inside, but also with our African partners, I think we can make some headway. I know Professor Robert has tried, especially on the cooperation part. He was supposed to organize, he organized it earlier. I think it didn't happen, high-level international conference, especially on the fight against terrorism in Sahel and West Africa. But I think African Union has done that role, and I would advise and encourage him to continue that cooperative, especially African Union is fine at that level, but also Sahel and West Africa, since it is interlinked. Let me stop at here. I thank you very much, and then later we can continue the discussion.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for this informative and insightful presentation. And allow me, please, to open the floor for questions. And just maybe we can take 3 by 3.
Okay.
So maybe we can start.
Dr. Kao. Thank you very much for your exposé. Le reste, je vais continuer en français. Je voulais des propositions sur oui, je voulais poser une question en ce qui concerne l'exposé que vous aviez présenté. Vous aviez parlé de partenariat en ce qui concerne la stratégie pour lutter contre le terrorisme. Je voudrais savoir, quand vous parliez de partenariat au niveau de la sous-région, vous parlez de quoi exactement? Est-ce que vous pouviez me donner des exemples? Merci.
Bonsoir, je suis Awa Khaliba de Plan International. Je voudrais commencer par remercier son Excellence le professeur Ducé pour l'initiative de cette rentrée diplomatique. Et permettez-moi de switcher en anglais pour notre présentateur. I would like to thank you very much, Mr. Presenter, for the excellent conversation around a very complex issue. I'm really curious to learn from your experience, what was the place and the role of youth, not as part of the challenge and the complexity of the issue, but as part of the solution. As you may know, Plan International is working on children and youth rights, and here in Togo we are working on projects where we put them at the center in order to anticipate their sensibility to this violent extremism. I'm really curious to know, how did you tackle that in your own region, and what are the lessons that we could learn here in Togo in order to anticipate such situations, especially with youth? And if there is anything about girls and women, we would be also really interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Je joins mes mots aux mots de la représentante de Plan International en remerciant le ministre Ducé de cette initiative. And as to my question, in your speech you mentioned ways to disentangle the jihadi elements from the community, and you mentioned to break links between the population and the state as one of their tactics. Well, could you give an example first of this ways to disentangle that you mentioned, and if you have an example that you lived, that you experienced, that you saw during your wide experience in this field, if you could mention some of these examples and some concrete case of this successful initiative to disentangle as you mentioned. Thank you.
Maybe, Excellency, we can start by these three questions and then further questions.
Thank you very much. I think I will cover all three questions, but if I don't address your question, then you will let me know. On the partnership, especially at the sub-regional level, the question was exactly what? On how to address at the sub-regional level. So maybe the Horn is not the best example of sub-regional that is working very well. because we have multiple sub-regional organizations. We have IGAD, we have East African Community, but we also have some members in Eastern Africa that also belong to SADC and belong to EAC. On the topic itself, on how to address or fight terrorism, it's very important that the political security contexts are working together, not only within the country, but also at the sub-regional level. Because what we have is at the policy level, there is ministers, and the ministers are communicating with their bilateral partners across other countries. But then you also have the specific operational and tactical knowledge is with the intelligence and security. And you know how the security people are. They try to hoard the information. They will only share with the president or the head of government. And then the ministers that are coordinating, it becomes very difficult to coordinate on. So what you want is the policy, the political head, and the technical people, that is the security chiefs, cooperating, but also across and with their sub-regional brothers, and that helps a lot. When that happens, and it happens sometimes, it covers a lot of ground in addressing the issue, and many of the, or several of the incidents that you have seen in, and I can name them, in DRC, in Mozambique, in also other countries, in the south and the east, but also in the west. It's always about the disjoint between the political and technical, but also the countries that are not sharing or don't have the specific intelligence that they need to share. On the youth rights and violent extremism, I'm not an expert in this, but there are cases where the international support are helping the youth in centers, but this is at the foot soldier level. You know, young boys, usually it's boys in Somalia and East Africa, that are recruited and then maybe captured or they defected. Then they are integrated, but I'm not the best person in this area. And ways and means of disentangling the jihadist elements from the local communities, I think disrupting is the most important, because you cannot finish them unless you take them all out. But making sure their capacities, the core capacities of these groups are disrupted: finance, the technology, and also the skills, those who with the skills, before it reaches a certain threshold that gives them the strong hand to overpower and in those areas. I thank you.
Maybe we can take 3 other questions.
Thank you very much. My name is Klaus Grötjen, Regional Representative of Hans Seidel Foundation for West Africa and Sahel. Thank you very much for your very interesting intervention, Excellency, and also our sincere thanks to Professor Faberge's Excellency for giving us this opportunity to listen to your words. Our question is, which role play aspects like narrative management issues, in particular hate speech, the prevention of hate speech, and action at the community level in your strategy? So the narrative management issues in your strategy, fake news, hate speech, and so on. Thank you very much.
Merci. Je voudrais remercier le professeur Robert Doucet pour son initiative qui apporte une lumière sur le problème de l'insécurité en Afrique. À cet effet, je voudrais donc poser deux questions. Il sera libre donc aussi bien au ministre qu'à l'ancien ministre des Affaires étrangères de Somalie de répondre et de m'apporter de la lumière, de m'éclairer en ce qui concerne les problèmes de sécurité en Afrique. Ma question, la première question, c'est de savoir si vous ne voyez pas que l'insécurité en Afrique de l'Ouest est une conséquence de la rivalité géostratégique. La deuxième question, aux premières heures des années 90, la CEDEAO avait pris le leadership de créer un mécanisme pour voir venir les conflits, c'est-à-dire observer et voir les indicateurs qui peuvent nous amener aux crises. Après pratiquement 12 ans, je me permets alors de dire que la CEDEAO n'a pas atteint l'objectif, puisqu'il y a encore beaucoup de crises qui se multiplient en Afrique. Alors, monsieur l'expert, monsieur l'ancien ministre des Affaires étrangères de Somalie, que pensez-vous alors de cette situation? Est-ce que la CEDEAO a-t-elle échoué? Sinon, qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire? Merci.
Je vous remercie. Je suis le docteur Peto, vice-président de l'Ordre des pharmaciens du Togo. Et je voudrais à mon tour remercier son Excellence le ministre des Affaires étrangères pour l'initiative. Je vois ce soir que la conférence est en anglais. Cela me rappelle que le Togo fait un petit virage vers aussi la diversité linguistique. Félicitations. Et merci aussi à notre hôte qui nous aborde ce thème. Ma question est une question qui a été récemment évoquée lors de la session de l'OMS Afrique dans notre capitale. La question de la circulation des faux médicaments et de leur impact. Vous avez effleuré les trafics qu'utilisent ces groupes terroristes, mais est-ce que, de votre expérience, quel est justement le rôle de ce trafic des médicaments sur le recrutement, le conditionnement des terroristes et aussi le financement de ce type de groupe? Merci.
Heavy question. So I will give the most difficult one to Professor Doucet. On the narrative and hate speech management, I think it's a very difficult area because who decides when it's hate speech? It can become controversial also, because sometimes what you have is opposition stronghold, in certain countries. But then in that same opposition stronghold, you might find some elements of extremist groups. And it takes a long time and to understand or to separate the two. Because if you attack the opposition, then that's what the extremist groups wanted, to frame and encapsulate the groups, the opposition, and that they are fighting for the rights of this ethnic group or clan or region. And then, so I'm not, again, communication expert, but I think it requires detailed knowledge in the specific context, but also separating the mainstream politics from jihadist groups. On ECOWAS, I think the Prof will address this. And I don't think it's ECOWAS only. This is, I mean, there is history of how jihadist groups have started, and you can go back to in Afghanistan when USSR invaded, or you can go back to even Muhammad Abdul Wahab of Saudi Arabia, or you can, it depends where you want to pick it up. But on a specific ECOWAS issues, I would leave to the Professor Dusi to address it. And then on the final one, on drugs and trafficking, in at least in East and Southern groups, they of course extort groups, not only extort but provide protection for groups that trade in drugs, minerals, and other illicit means of doing things. And but you will not find jihadists, at least in that part of area, trafficking the drugs themselves. But for example, in DRC, they can provide protection for those who are doing mining, but they are not in the same religion and even not in the same language. But they have the network and the power to protect them, but also to help them transit these things. Thank you. Prof. On the ECOWAS.
Thank you. En fait, c'est pas ma conférence, mais je voudrais juste dire que je ne veux pas répondre à la question parce que je veux qu'il se présente. Celui qui a posé cette question, c'est l'ambassadeur Bariki, qui est inspecteur des missions diplomatiques au ministère des Affaires étrangères. Donc, ce n'est pas à lui de nous poser cette question. Donc, je suis désolé de ne pouvoir pas répondre à cette question. Je pense qu'il connaît la réponse. Merci. Thank you.
Maybe we can have another group of questions.
Merci beaucoup. Je remercie sincèrement les ministres pour le thème choisi. Bon, dans un passé récent, on a toujours pensé chez nous aussi que le terrorisme c'est ailleurs. On n'a jamais rêvé qu'aujourd'hui, ça sera à nos portes. Bon, nous avons, à travers notre ONG, fait une proposition par rapport aux stratégies. Aujourd'hui, je vais encore réitérer la même chose. Le terrorisme a commencé en Europe, en Occident, avec les moyens de bord, avec la technologie. Ils ne sont pas arrivés au bout. Et chaque jour, ça ne fait que continuer. On investit des milliards. Je suis sûr que si on nous donne les chiffres, on sera vraiment surpris. Mais pourquoi ne pas, dans nos pays pauvres, est-ce que nous avons les moyens de cette politique? Pourquoi ne pas penser à d'autres stratégies, comme le ministre a si bien proposé le thème? Les stratégies, c'est quoi? C'est l'information. Et l'information, puisque souvent les terroristes, on constate dans le monde que c'est souvent les jeunes plus ou moins matures qu'on associe. Pourquoi ne pas mettre au centre les femmes, les associations des femmes pour l'information en rapport avec leurs services de renseignement? Parce que avant que les terroristes n'arrivent dans un milieu, ils doivent nécessairement avoir une base quelque part et circuler dans le milieu. Or, la femme, elle peut être associée dans ce sens qu'elle peut remonter, elle peut observer les changements de comportement, la présence des individus doutés, et en rapport avec les services de renseignement, faire un bon travail qui est moins coûteux que d'investir des milliards qui ne nous donnent rien à ce jour. Merci.
No more questions?
Thank you very much. On terrorists, yes, they came in the last decade for many African countries, it's true. And I think specific technical approaches are multifaceted, and you mentioned it, one of the strategies in having association of women, in observing change of behavior of young boys and stuff like that. But it depends in the context. In certain contexts, it could be witch hunting. If especially people who don't know the intricacies of how these groups operate, you have people reporting on each other. I think in some contexts it can be problematic, and it can create backlash because you don't know who's reporting on whom, and it can achieve the opposite of what you wanted. But again, it depends on the context, and I think the main point here is to find ways of preventing that fear is not instilled in the specific communities. Because once that threshold is reached, then it can become very difficult for the government and for the authorities to address immediately the issue. Thank you.
Thank you again, Excellency, for this informative and fruitful discussion. And maybe I would invite His Excellency, Professor Ducey, for closing remarks.
Merci une fois encore. Nous remercions une fois encore l'illustre conférencier. Et je vous prie d'applaudir, s'il vous plaît. Nous remercions également Monsieur le modérateur. Ainsi s'achève cette rentrée diplomatique 2022-2023. Et tout à l'heure, il y aura une photo de famille juste à ma droite avec l'aide des agents du protocole d'État. Et juste après, un cocktail, comme je l'avais annoncé, vous êtes offert par Monsieur le ministre des Affaires étrangères. Une fois encore, merci d'être venu et au plaisir de vous revoir pour d'autres défis et d'autres enjeux. Bonsoir chez vous et bon retour.